packets that were given to us, or a lot of information that was studied in advance of this meeting. So I will now turn it over to any members of the board if they have any questions. If anyone would like to start. Board Member Vieira, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. First of all, thank you for everyone that is here, and thank you for all your comments, all your insights, and all the information provided. I do have several questions and clarifications that I would like to have. Number one is, do we have any evaluation of the sign that was developed and posted back in 2016 or 15? Is there any evaluation? Did we see any change, any increase in the number of calls or anything that can provide some clarification to that?
Madam Chair, Board Member Vieira, and members of the Parks Board, I don't think that we've ever specifically measured data as it relates to what transpired from when those were implemented in 2015 until now.
So a comment with the signs, I think that it is always important to have signs, but the sign is as relevant as people want to stop and read them. So I will have some cautions or just rely on the sign, but wouldn't advise that. But a clarification, so 70% of the cases that happened during this last year are from individuals from within Arizona residents. And can you, do you have any other information? You did mention that they happen to have chronic disease or other health conditions?
That's a good question, and I do not have the answer for the board. As far as, we do ask those questions when patients are conscious and can answer them, but I do not have the answer today for that one on their medical history of our patients.
And then there was also something that you're presently doing is educating hotels and other facilities as it relates to heat warning. Okay. Can you remind me what are the variables that you are using to identify or for the recommendations of mountains and trails to be closed during the national heat advisory?
Yeah, Chairperson Dalton and Board Member Vieira. I understand the question is how do we decide which trails would be suited for location? So when we met originally for the pilot in 2021, there were three key aspects that we focused on. They were trails that were very popular with out-of-town visitors. They were technically hard to do rescues on, and they were trails that had a lot of hikers on them. That's the original three kind of prongs that were used through that original pilot season and then the preceding seasons. When we met in October of 2024, with the data that Fire brought forward, South Mountain Park with its consistently rising rescues was also added to. Obviously there are trails on South Mountain Park that might not meet those three original criterias, but do present a lot of rescue situations.
Board Member Vieira and members of the Parks Board, I don't know if Chief Price has anything to add. I recall that the complexity of the rescues was one of those factors. I don't know, Jared, if that's mentioned, but I wanted to let Chief Price have the opportunity if there's anything else to add.
When we talk about complexity of the rescues there, Chair Dalton, members of the board, it's the equipment involved because of the depth, the into-depth reserve, the narrowness of the trails. Sometimes when you have to set up base LZs for the helicopters, if they're going to perform a hoist because of the location of the patient, then hoisting off the mountain because of that size of the preserve and the location, the temperatures and the condition of the patient, and then bring them back that base LZ if that answers the question about complexity.
three actually, other things. I will also caution about, even though I love volunteers and I think that they are extremely important in many situations, but I will caution of relying on a volunteer service for these type of efforts, just because the volunteers are as reliable as their interest or their accessibility is. So to develop something like that for a whole set of trails or different mountains, it just requires a lot of management. Can we talk a little bit about it, or do you have any idea expanding the hours during, or shifting the hours during the national weather extreme advisory? So it focusing, because in the summer days are so much longer, is it possible to have, what is the recommendation, what it is, any modeling that can be done during those hours?
Madam Chair, members of the board, and their board member Vieira, if I understand their question correctly, you're asking that, can we evaluate the hours that when those trail closures should be in effect when the National Weather Service issues the heat warning?
Yes, so instead of having it during the highest heat index, then shifting the open hours to later or earlier. Like 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and 8 at night.
Sure, so adjusting the trailhead hours in general. That's definitely something that at the board's direction, we could look at doing. The public has, submitted petitions requesting that, particularly in the summer months, that trails be considered to be open earlier than they currently are.
Yeah, I would like to get some information in how would that look like. There was a statistician in the group, so having some modeling as it relates to that. And then one last recommendation, I still would like to see a medical professional to come and talk about the relation between extreme heat and the impact in the health. I do appreciate the information that was provided by the fire department, but I would like to have a medical professional.
Why don't you have them come and talk
Board
about
member
how
Vieira, that
good
is something that we can
exercise is for
do
you?
and can try to secure for the February work study.
Great, thank you. Board member Porter, who is here virtually, you have your virtual hand up. Board member Porter?
Yes, thank you, and I'm very sorry that I couldn't be with you all today. I had a work trip, so I'm in the airport, but I've been listening and I really appreciate all the public comments and the presentations. I have a couple of questions. And first, let me ask a question about funding, and this I think would be for Director Aguilar. I'll just highlight that we Parks Board members are volunteers. We have the authority under the city charter to set the hours for the parks under the document that's essentially the constitution for the city of Phoenix. But we don't have the power of the purse over the parks. That's in the purview of the city council. And I'm wondering, Director Aguilar, if it's feasible to get funding from the city council to fund a volunteer coordinator position for the Parks Department. Is that something that's been explored? Is that something that, you think could happen?
Madam Chair, members of the board, board member Porter, that's a great question. So yes, right now we have a volunteer park steward program, which but the people that are involved in overseeing that is not their sole duty. They are rangers that have other duties, so we do not have a dedicated volunteer program manager for that. Through a supplemental budget process, we did receive a position that is now coordinating a coordinated volunteer program in the urban parks. So in order to do that in the preserves, we would need to do that through the city's supplemental budget process to request a position that could be focused on doing that.
So if we wanted to, for example, pilot at one trailhead, a program where volunteers would be at the trailhead, as we've heard many people request this evening, one idea would be to request through that supplemental process, I take it, funding for a volunteer coordinator position.
Board Member Porter, that is correct. And generally, when the city produces the trial budget, there are community meetings that are held during the month of April, where people can also submit requests like this, advocate for such a request. With the city's upcoming budget shortfall, it may be a difficult year this next fiscal year to be successful with something like that, but that is the process and the method that ultimately the mayor and council approve when they adopt the city budget.
Okay, and it would be helpful perhaps at our next meeting to hear about whether such positions, I think in Scottsdale, they have the McDowell Mountain. There's an association that may be funding volunteer coordination, but it would be interesting to know if such programs exist in other places that are dealing with these kinds of natural resources risks, and how they work, whether they've been successful. I had a question for Chief Price, which is, I was interested in a data point that 70% of rescues are for residents. I'm interested if you have broken down the rescues of residents and non-residents by seasonality to know if it's our neighbors who are the ones who are needing rescues during the super hot days, or is it people from out of town? We often hear that it's people from out of town. So that breakdown would be really interesting and helpful.
Chair Dalton, board members, that is an excellent question. I'd be happy to look at that. We can look at that and get an answer for you. I do not have an answer on the breakdown as it relates to seasons for you tonight, but we'll get an answer.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all the questions I have for this evening, and I'll continue to listen. Again, thanks to everyone for there's some very good, helpful ideas and super rich information presented this evening. I appreciate, all that I've had a chance to learn this evening.
Thank you so much. Other board members who have questions or comments? Board Member Zerker?
Thank you. Really appreciate everyone's contributions this evening, and information is very helpful. And what was reaffirmed for me is that everybody in this room loves the Phoenix Parks and the Phoenix Mountain Preserve. So thank you all for being here and expressing that. Just a couple questions. I don't know if you know them now, so maybe for February. A lot of the energy here is focused, I think, on South Mountain because that was the one change that we had contemplated. So it'd be helpful to know, I think there was some information about acreage, but the number of trails and the number of access points at South Mountain, I think is like magnitudes different from Camelback, perhaps even north, and Piestewa. So that'd be helpful to know that because I think that's important. And then I'm not as familiar with South Mountain as I am with the North Mountain and the others, but the number of blue diamond or double blue diamonds on South Mountain as compared to the other kinds of trails would be helpful to understand better. And just a question for Chief Price. I was interested in somebody's comment about perhaps fire not responding. Are there circumstances, Chief, under which fire would not respond to a 911 call for service? And what would that look like?
Chair and members of the board, there is no circumstance that the Phoenix Fire Department is not going to respond to a 911 call and help the community. I will reflect on the rescue we had where the firefighters would back up the mountain. That wasn't a policy violation. That was a plan that we had in place.
I'm sorry, it was or was not?
It was not a policy violation. It was a plan that they had in place to try to not have them go up the mountain again. The policy of the Phoenix Fire Department is to risk our lives to
save savable lives. That is our policy. Thank you. And one other, I've also heard, or I think it was in maybe one of the presentations that were sent, the suggestion that drones could be used more effectively, perhaps. Has the fire department begun using drones, and how so, and how would that affect your deployment of resources in these circumstances, in these high temperature risks?
Thank you, Chair Bell.
Seriously,
I'm
though.
gonna let Chief Jones, who runs our special operations program, we do have a drone program. I'll let him reflect on how it's incorporated into the
That's where they got the drone. From
Chair,
Parks.
members of the board, the drone's an effective
They
tool
pay for
that
it
we've used in the past, but the most
Ah.
effective tool we have when we have these rescues, we do air reconnaissance is our Firebird 10 program, which is a collaboration between PD and fire. We take those ships up there, they give us an aerial view that's better than a drone, it's more effective, and we don't have a drone operating at the same time that we have the Firebird 10 ship up in the air at that time. So we'll look into the feasibility, I'll get answers back to you, but as it stands right now, that is a better tool in our toolbox, the Firebird 10.
So you currently do not use drones?
We use them on a very limited basis. I hope that answers your question.
That's fine. The context is helpful. I've lost track of where the department is in the use of drones, and so
Yeah.
that was something that I
Because
that
it's
I
a function.
noted as well. So, this has been really helpful to me. It gives a lot of information to think about over the next 30 days as we work through this to come back in February. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Board Member Moya?
Thank you, everyone. Quick question, Assistant Chief Price. What is the typical injury type for these mountain rescues?
Well, Chair, members of the board, I would have to get back to you on the specifics of that. I can tell you that based on our EPCR charts for mountain rescue, 75% of the patients are a health-related sort of scenario, medical patient, 25% are shown to be some sort of traumatic sort of injury. I don't think our staff probably break down that specific for you. Chief Jones, is there anything you can reflect on to that?
How the fuck do you not come with that data?
No, I don't have any better answer than that.
I guess I think a lot of us are under a lot of assumptions, so yeah, that information would be helpful in February if at all possible. Thank you. Next question, Director. I know you've been on this board for a while, and rangers have ebb and flowed, and we've had issues with hiring rangers. I know we got approval for an increase in rangers. What
For
is
flatland
the
parks.
current situation with our park rangers, and what is the current situation with our mountain park rangers?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the board, Board Member Moya. Over the last several years, we've been fortunate to gain some additional park ranger positions. That was also done through the supplemental budget process that I spoke about earlier, and also a result of community advocacy some of those years coming to budget hearings and asking the city council to add additional positions. So we have just over 100 rangers currently. I would say it's about 60% of them roughly are in the preserves, and 40% of them are now part of our urban team in our flatland, what we call our flatland, more traditional neighborhood parks.
I'm sorry, that's 40% of them? Okay.
In terms of where we are, as with other positions, there is turnover, and so at any given time, we may have up to a dozen positions vacant between those two. They were part of the citywide class and compensation study, so like many other positions in the city, there was a slight increase in salary to those rangers. So we have continued to build our ranger program over the years, again, with just over 100 positions currently.
I know that 60% is a good fair number for the preserves. However, maybe as an idea of like during the high season, there could be a shift of some of that 40% to help that 60% and probably answer a lot of these questions, just as a suggestion that maybe we could see what that could or might look like. I don't know if there's a job classification. I know the city is very much into those job classifications and things, so just an idea. Thank you. One last, it's 2015 for a ad, I call it an ad, to be around for me is a long time. It probably has grown stale in terms of take a hike, do it right. It's probably inefficient at this time. It's probably not hitting the target market or who we are. And I don't know what that process is. I don't know if the parks has that type of funding to look at it different, or maybe partner with our friends at the fire department, because I know they have an extensive PIO program that could help with something like that. But again, that I feel, I don't know how everyone else feels with that. Yeah, I think people have probably seen that sign for 10 years and probably have just disregarded it to the point of not reading it or looking at it. And also, I know we do talk with the Hotel Association, but also expand that partnership to see what that might look like, because I know there's others that are out there, so.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Board Member Moya, and that is something that we can certainly look into as far as what resources might be needed to enhance those marketing and campaign efforts.
Thank you. Other members of the board? Board Member Esponte,
Thank you, Chairwoman. So thank you, staff, for all of this dedication to making this happen and working up all of it, and thank you to Fire and Public Safety for keeping us all safe, and more importantly, members of the public who enjoy these parks and really are the ones who are guiding this for all of us. I have questions. Thank you all for coming, by the way, because this is a long night, and most of you probably came from other parts of the valley, so it says a lot about how much you care about the preserves. You guys, my fellow board members mentioned a lot of things that I already wanted to hit on to with, I really love the suggestion of if there's any funding for a volunteer coordinator or something to that effect. And then reaching out to maybe evolve the campaign. Board Member Moya suggested, and going deeper into partnering with the concierge hotels and whatnot.
Oh my God,
I
I've
was
been
keeping
doing
track
this for
of
years.
public comments and
Literally years.
suggestions, and there's so much that I was doing plus marks for hydration stations, with volunteers, with even having rangers at different points that are critical for the trails to remind people, like, there's no way you're gonna catch me going up Echo Canyon, even in the best time of season, like, it's not for me. And I think for that
So glad
being
she's
said, so I
making
think
decisions for
there's a lot of, that we're all hearing the same, that we could do something about as a board and as staff, and even if there's funding involved in figuring out how that works. But the captains and the community members who really love their trails, I really love that idea, because there's so many of you folks that come every month, every year, for years and years, and you really do care about your trailheads, and you're the perfect stewards to keep on with this collaboration and let more of your neighbors and fellow hikers know. So if we can keep that going, I think it's an amazing thing. I'm a community engagement nerd. I want to get some points of clarification though, because we say this closing all the mountain trails. Are we closing all the mountain trails? And how many of them are horizontal versus vertical? It's my understanding that the
Oh my
black
God,
diamonds,
she's
to
never
the point of
been
the
hiking.
questions of figuring out if we could see a map of these sensitive trailheads, just like when we're talking about surfing and skiing, you know where you're going, and you've got the ski patrol and you've got the Coast Guard, and I think that's what we're all trying to achieve here. And no, we're probably not like any other city or mountain preserves in the country, but we're also the biggest park system, public park system in the country, and we're a desert. So I would love to know how many of the horizontal trails are actually closed, because for mountain bikers and walkers, to me, those also the most at risk and critical, or are we mostly speaking to the more vertical, steep trails? Because there's this misconception that I hear on talk radio, on the conservative radio stations and the liberal ones, and on the local news. There's a lot of confusion, and I even heard folks here say, like, closing all the trails, and to my understanding, we're not closing our 241 miles of trails, we're just limiting access to the most dangerous ones, the sensitive ones, on certain heat days, not for like the entire summer. So we need to clarify this, because the saying we're closing all the trails is frightening, and it does not sound fair. So it would just be great to figure out how to clarify that better, or if we can reiterate in this room with all these stewards of the community, so when they go back
We're not
to their neighbors,
confused.
they can repeat the facts.
Board member, Bustamante, Madam Chair, members of the Parks Board. So as it stands, based on the action that's been taken by the Parks Board since 2021, currently trails within Payastoa, Camelback Mountain, and as of October, South Mountain are part of the closure. So those are the three mountain areas where the board has taken action to close trails currently. It's gonna be a combination of everything you said. By adding South Mountain in, there's a variety of levels of difficulty and elevations of trails because it is so unique and very massive. I think when we return in February, we can certainly come back based on the questions we're getting to go into more detail about the trail rating system, the way these trails are ranked or rated, I should say, within those three areas where the trails close currently. And then again, those trails are closing on days when the National Weather Service issues a heat warning between the hours of 8 and 5.
It would be, thank you so much for clarifying that, and it would be great if in that next follow-up of information, if we can figure out if they are, you know, on horse trails, bike trails, versus the more vertical treacherous trails. Because maybe that will help us reevaluate scaling back the closures for certain ranges. Thank you so much.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
So, I want more clarity on that question. There are multiple trails at South Mountain. And so are we saying that all of them are closed? So we close the whole thing?
Yes, Board Member Barnwell, based on the board's action in October, that was to add all trails within South Mountain Park based on the October action.
Is there an option to close specific trails? Is that currently a way of doing that? Because I know sometimes there'll be a chain that says this trail is not open. Is that possible?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the board, Board Member Barnwell, that is something in your direction we can go back. Our team can further evaluate the levels of difficulties in the trails there. South Mountain is massive, and so even though a trail may start as easy or moderate, it can still connect to a trail that's a little bit more difficult. So logistically, it may, be challenging. However, that is information we can come back with in February as well.
Is that possible for the other trailheads?
In terms of looking at if any trails within those but we can evaluate that too. Again, South Mountain is unique because it has far more trails than the others.
Now, there was a statement that said 60% of the trails are closed. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, members of the board, Board Member Barnwell, I'd have to look at that. I don't believe that is correct. No, with the closures again, I think, and we had a slide that had many, over 100 miles of trails still open.
We're talking about percentage.
Great.
I just want to piggyback on Mr. Moy's comment. I'd be interested in hearing more about what it would take to refresh the signage program and the messaging program. I agree with the speakers. I think it isn't getting the message across that we want. I thought that Chief Price's picture of the heat stroke and heat, I forget what the two were, heat exhaustion, thank you, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. You post something like that talks about kidney failure and all that gets people's attention. Somebody mentioned Grand Canyon. I hiked the Grand Canyon several times, and there is a sign towards the top about it's a falling danger sign, but it's in German. And I still remember that, having seen it there. So there are things you can do to get people's attention, and I think we should think about that in terms of heat. And as Mr. Moya said, a 10-year-old campaign probably could be refreshed, but I know it takes resources, and so it'd be good for us to talk about that more in February, I think.
Great. I have a few questions. First, I want to understand a little bit more about the National Weather Service and what triggers and how we carry out that heat, excessive heat warning. If you could speak to that.
I think board member Dalton and members of the board, is the question more about what goes into when a heat warning is issued. We do have Tom Frieders, if he's still here with the National Weather Service, he is heading down, and he can certainly speak to their criteria.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Tom Frieders, National Weather Service here in Phoenix. Yeah, in the southwest U.S. here, we use a index called a heat risk, and it's a value from minimal heat risk up to major to extreme heat risk. And what that does is it looks at the time of year, the length of the heat, and also it's linked to collaborated effort with CDC to see when the highest effect the heat has on like fatalities and models, illnesses and fatalities. So it actually, that's why you will see different temperature values trigger an excessive heat warning, and we use the excessive heat warning on those most extreme days of major to extreme heat risk. And those are the values through our studies have shown that every one of us can be affected by the heat. As long as you don't take necessary precautions, you don't have access to cooling, hydration, and things like that. So we focus our excessive heat warnings on those extreme days. Usually it's in the upper 10% of temperatures at any given time of year, close to records typically. So yeah, so that value changes at the time of year. So right now, it's 105 degrees when we would trigger that excessive heat warning. In July, our normal is 107. We live in a hot climate, right? So our normal is 107. So to trigger an excessive heat warning, it has to be over 114 in that most significant heat. So yeah, it changes. It's 105 from October all the way through May, middle of May, and then it starts a stair-step approach of increasing the temperature because as people get acclimated to the heat, that their bodies can get acclimated and respond better to dealing with the heat. So hopefully that explains. We did have a couple slides if it needs more explanation.
Yeah, it does. And I recall that when this program was first established, we decided that this was a more reliable factor rather than looking at some arbitrary temperature. So that is why we continue to use that. So thank you so much.
Okay, sure.
Chief, I have a few questions for you. The issue of training for the mountain rescue team was mentioned tonight, both on the hours of training as well as ongoing. Could you speak to that a little bit in terms of how members of that mountain rescue team are trained?
Absolutely, and I'll defer to Chief Jones, who's our Deputy Chief of Special Operations. He oversees training. He's also one of the leaders for our FEMA team, AZ Task Force 1.
Chair Dalton, members of the board, so our training starts out with the initial 200-hour curriculum for a technical rescue technician. It involves a number of pieces to that, being mountain rescues, confined space, trench, structural collapse. So they get a number of hours of mountain rescues, rope systems, low angle, steep angle, high angle, able operations during that 200-hour curriculum. And then after that, they have a continuing education program. They're required to go to training every Tuesday, and that'll be on a different number of subjects throughout the calendar year, which includes mountain rescue. So they receive that continuously as their time as a technician. Hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you. And can you also speak to members of that mountain rescue team, if they are, I would assume, on duty, they are not just standing by waiting for a mountain rescue, they are fulfilling other responsibilities for the fire department. Could you explain other responsibilities that they fulfill?
Objection, leading.
So
I said
all
objection,
of our
leading.
fire stations have fire apparatus in them, and they're all hazardous fire stations. So as an example, Station 12 is a TRT station. There's an engine and a ladder in that station. All the firefighters and captains who work there are TRT, and they provide service to that entire community. So now, if there's a fire, they're going to that. If there's a chest pain call, they're going to that. And for mountain rescues, if they're the closest truck and and part of that team, which they are, they're gonna go to mountain rescues as well into your team.
So is there a scenario in which in any given day, a firefighter on the mountain rescue team could be fighting a fire earlier in the day and then could potentially also be a part of the mountain rescue?
Sure, no, absolutely.
Well, why don't we just implement a one incident per day rule?
John, you're up today.
I don't know if you have the answer to this, but I'm curious. Are you able to, as we look at South Mountain, we know that there's many different access points and different trail levels. Are you able to pinpoint where those calls are coming from? It would be helpful to see in a more detailed fashion.
Sure, no, that's an excellent question. We will work on that for this board. That is certainly part of the
Again, why
information
wasn't
we'll
all
get
this shit
from
prepared for
911
this?
callers, so we can find patients as those
Vote to shut it
we will work on gathering those patients to see if we can get a map out for you all.
Does it include a whole?
Good, thank you. And I did want to clarify a question that was asked earlier. So your response to the question around the injuries that you see and what necessitates a rescue, you said, I think 25% maybe due to some kind of broken bone or something, some trauma that is caused as a result of hiking. 75% is more of a health-related issue. And by that you mean that we don't have this necessarily, but could be related to heat stroke, it could be a heart attack, it could be some other medical condition that you're facing.
That's correct.
Okay. I think, the issue of city funding has come up. I think it would be helpful. I know that we had a presentation earlier this year. We had a member of the Government Affairs Office here who talked about the state funding cuts that the city is facing again this year. Seems more severe than in previous years. I think I love the comments about new signage. I agree. I think from a messaging perspective, we can certainly strengthen the messaging. I think that we need to do something that's a little bit more hard hitting, which is I think what my colleagues were saying, so I wholeheartedly agree with that. I would be interested in I'm not asking you to do a full cost estimate, but just recognizing where the city is at, the cuts that we're facing this year from the state. What would a massive, replacement of signage on these trails look like? And is that even feasible in the near term?
Not helping us.
Bunch of signs.
Last question, could you speak to, on excessive heat days, I think you talked about the temperature as far as the helicopter rescues, around 110, 115, makes it very difficult to potentially have that helicopter be able to perform a rescue. In situations where the helicopter is not available, what is the backup?
Madam Chair, members of the board, so the backup is going to be, especially when we talk about South Mountain depths and those trails. As an example, we have other shifts available that don't have the hoist. If that is down, and when we talk about conditions, if that ship is down, there's other options, but there are no landing zones based on that program at South Mountain. Now, whether, again, back to your question, permits it, then, or doesn't permit it, then it's going to be hiking in with crews, which you saw in that video, all the gear, basket, the big wheel, rope systems, hiking in there based upon patient locations, cell phone pings, tracking them down, and then trying to get back there and locate them and extract them out of there. And that could be through big wheel evolution, depending on the terrain, if it's low angle, if it's steep angle in some parts, they may have to see, we saw that video, set up anchors, rope systems, getting down to a low angle point, and then hike them out.
And so what typically necessitates the need for a helicopter? Is it based on the severity of the condition of the patient?
That's one of the variables we call critical factors. So that could be the severity of the patient. It could be the distance into a preserve. It could be the time it takes to get them out. It could be the terrain. There's lots of factors that play into that we will use that to get them out there to reduce the risk of injury illness.
Thank you.
Are they posting that tonight?
Are there any other questions from members of the board or comments?
Chairwoman, I just wanted to reiterate that if I heard it correctly, that staff is gonna come back in February with more data that would include a map that shows us the risky trails layered with where the rescues are coming from. For however many years we can collect that information. Great, thank you.
Great. Well, I want to conclude by how I started. We all care about this community. We really appreciate all of the time that you all have taken to be down here. We appreciate the in-depth presentations, research that was conducted. So thank you so much, and we have a lot more to come on this very important topic, so thank you. And with that, the meeting is concluded.